Hi everyone, I'm Dina with Mills Family Gardening. We live in North Texas, Zone 8A. Today is March 16th, and our average last frost date is approximately mid-March, so now is the perfect time to plant tomatoes. It's very important before you plant tomatoes, if you started them from seed, to harden them off. And I harden off my seedlings and plants right in that area. You can see that area gets a lot of dappled sun, and that's where I keep all my plants that I carry outside from the house, and I keep them there for a week. They get dappled sun all throughout the week, and about a week or a couple of weeks they're ready to be transplanted outside, and they can tolerate full sun. The first important thing for planting tomatoes is to wait for your weather to warm up. In the next 10 days, the lows here are going to be about 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit at night, and during the day the temperature is supposed to be above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So 40 degrees Fahrenheit is a little bit low for tomatoes, but it's not too bad. They can still tolerate the temperature. They will slow down in their growth, but after it warms up, they will perk up and they'll start growing fast again. Ideally, you would want to plant tomatoes outside when the temperatures are above 50 degrees day and night. The second important thing is to choose a location that gets as much sun as possible. Tomatoes require between 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day. We used to grow tomatoes in that spot where the green T-posts are, but that spot gets too shaded once our maple tree starts leafing out, and a lot of leaves create a lot of shade. And our tomatoes lately have not been producing and growing well. They would not grow flowers, they would not set fruit, so they will be sitting in the ground in the shade for a long time without doing much. For that reason, I'm moving our tomatoes into a different spot where our metal raised bed is, and it gets more sun during the day, and I'm hoping that it will encourage them to grow flowers and set fruit faster. I'm going to plant our tomatoes in the raised bed where the soil is perfect, it's fluffy. We put a lot of great quality potting soil in that raised bed. But if you're going to plant tomatoes in the ground and you have clay soil, like we have heavy red clay soil here in the backyard, I would highly recommend that you would add compost or composted manure to your soil, mix it really well, and that will make your soil looser and your tomato plants will be growing much faster, setting flowers and fruit much faster. If you plant your tomato plants straight into the clay soil without amending the soil, then your tomatoes will be sitting in the ground for a long time. They will grow very slowly and they won't produce much. But if you don't feel like amending clay soil, you can simply dig a hole that's twice as large as the tomato root ball and fill that hole with good quality garden soil or compost and plant your tomato plant into that medium. To keep tomato plants disease-free for as long as possible, it's important to plant them into good potting soil or soil in the ground, and also fertilize them well and water them regularly. If you do all that, your tomato plants will be disease-free throughout the growing season. Here in North Texas, our heat sets in pretty early, about end of May, and in June it gets too hot for tomatoes and they cannot tolerate the temperature, they get stressed, and they get prone to diseases, and that's when it's impossible to keep them alive, and at that point I just let them die. Tomato plants can get attacked by tomato hornworms. They're large green caterpillars and they can devour a whole tomato plant with tomato fruit on it in about a night. And for that, you can spray your tomatoes regularly with BT or spinosad, and those two sprays should take care of those tomato hornworms. And also, to keep tomato plants disease-free, you need to provide enough air circulation in between the plants. For that, it's a good idea to prune tomatoes some, and also don't plant them too close to each other. And also, if you have a lot of plants growing around tomatoes or in between tomatoes, it's better to remove those plants so there would be enough air flowing in between the plants. When it comes to harvesting tomatoes, I normally don't wait for them to ripen completely on the vine. I harvest them as soon as I see some red coloring, just a hint of red color or pink color on the fruit, and then I harvest it. I simply set it on the countertop and it usually ripens there. Here in North Texas, it gets really hot around May or by the end of May, beginning of June, and that's when I start setting up a shade cloth of about 40% above the tomato plants. That shade cloth prolongs the life of tomato plants. They stay disease-free longer and they produce fruit longer. So if you live in a hot climate, make sure to provide shade by using a shade cloth, about 40% for your tomato plants. To plant this tomato plant, I dug a hole, and inside of the hole I'm going to put some organic all-purpose granular fertilizer. I'm going to use a generous amount of it. Since it's an organic fertilizer, I'll mix it with the soil, and then I'll get the tomato plant out of its container and plant it like this. I know that some gardeners like to plant tomatoes really deep. It's been a practice lately among a lot of gardeners. And I used to do that too in the past, but I noticed that when I planted the same depth as it was in the container, it grows just fine. So you really don't have to plant tomatoes real deep. And also, if you dig a hole too deep, then the soil deeper is much cooler, and that might slow down the growth of your tomato plant. So dig a hole of a reasonable depth and plant your tomato inside of the hole and cover it with the soil. Like I said, we already have really good soil here, so I don't need to amend it. I could add some aged cow manure or any kind of manure, but I'm using good quality fertilizer. It should feed the tomato plant well. You will notice that this tomato plant has a few yellow leaves, and that happened because I did not water it enough, and also it needs to be fertilized. So I'll just remove the yellow leaves. It's not a big deal that it has yellow leaves. It just needs to be fed better, and it will grow much faster, will be much greener. It's just I neglected it a little bit. I started these tomato plants back in January under our grow lights, and just about a week ago I took them outside to harden off. And you can see this tomato plant is a little bit leggy, it's a little thin, but it's okay. Once it starts getting full sun all day, it will be fed well with the fertilizer and liquid fertilizer, then it will get much thicker stem and it will be much greener. A lot of gardeners are concerned about blossom and rot problem in tomatoes, and they say that this problem comes from a lack of calcium, but that might not be true, especially if I use this kind of fertilizer. It has 5% of calcium in it, so I already added some calcium with the fertilizer, and blossom and rot happens because of inconsistent watering. So it's very important to water your tomatoes regularly. Also, if you let your tomato plant sit in dry soil and then you give it a lot of water, that might lead to cracking of the tomato fruit itself. So make sure to keep the soil evenly moist, water it regularly. If you have drip irrigation, set on drip irrigation, it will take care of the watering for you. It's important to mulch your tomato plants, and I can use leaves here. We have a lot of leaves from our red oak and other trees in our backyard, so I can use them as mulch. And I try to not bring the leaves too close to the stem of the plant because insects congregate under the leaves and mulch, and they start chewing on the stem of the plant, and that damages the plant. And you can use any kind of mulch as long as it doesn't have any artificial dyes or fragrances. It can be hardwood mulch, cedar mulch, pine mulch. Sometimes I use our guinea pig bedding that I spread around the plant, and it works wonderfully. Even though I added all-purpose fertilizer at the time of planting of the tomato plant, it's not enough to sustain it throughout the growing season. That's why I use liquid fish fertilizer and more bloom to fertilize my tomato plants about once a week or once in 2 weeks. I like to combine those two liquid fertilizers because when combined, they make more of a balanced all-purpose liquid fertilizer, because fish fertilizer has more nitrogen and more bloom has more phosphorus and potassium. So if you combine them, they will make an all-purpose liquid fertilizer. Tomatoes are vining plants, and if we keep them on the ground, they will get diseases. For that reason, it's better to give them some support so they would climb up. So you can use some garden stakes. Simply put them around a tomato plant. You can use 3 or 4 of these stakes. And as a tomato plant grows, you can put jute around or metal wire to give it some support, and it will stay inside of this cage. If you use just 1 stake on its own, this height would not be enough for a tomato plant. So you might want to use a taller garden stake and simply tie your tomato to the stake as it keeps growing. But with this method, you would have to remove side shoots from the tomato. You can also use these metal cages that are made especially for tomatoes. Just push them into the ground, and the tomato plant will stay inside of this cage as it grows. You can also use a few T-posts and make a trellis for tomatoes. Tie tomatoes to the trellis and they will climb up the string as they grow. In the past, I used to keep only one branch on the tomato. I would remove all the side shoots and suckers. But this year, I think I'm going to let all the side shoots grow because our growing season is so short until the summer heat sets in and tomatoes do not grow well. And so I'm just going to let my tomato plants grow as many side shoots and as many flowers and fruits as they can possibly grow. And that will hopefully give us more fruit. And I will only prune all the yellowing leaves and also all the leaves that are close to the ground, because when I water, the bacteria from the ground splashes on the leaves and that creates different diseases. And that's how we plant and grow tomatoes. I hope you all have a great tomato season this year. Harvest a lot of tomatoes and make a lot of tomato sauce. Thank you so much for watching this video and have a great day.